On the 20th floor of a tower built for people who never saw their own shadows, a janitor was about to break a rule that would cost him his job, rewrite a CEO's life, and awaken a blind child's world. Before sunrise, three lives that had never truly met would collide, quietly, fiercely, and forever. There are nights when a city does not sleep so much as hold its breath. The traffic thins, the glass towers dim, but somewhere in those high, bright floors that were built for people who never scrubbed their own dishes, one light stays on a little longer than it should. The 20th floor of the Helios Group Tower was like that, a strip of quiet in a world that measured time in deals and deadlines. Past 10 in the evening, the offices were dark. Desks sat in perfect order, screens black. Chairs tucked in as if the day had been erased and written over with shadow. Only the cleaning carts moved, wheels whispering over marble, and a janitor in a worn Navy uniform pushed one of them, his body familiar with the rhythm of this place in the hours when no one was supposed to be watching. His name was Jack Rowan. At 42, he carried himself like someone who had survived several lives inside one. The uniform fit him, but it felt like a costume over a different man. The man who once sat under stage lights with a piano in front of him and a brass band behind his shoulders. The man whose wife waited in the first row and smiled like the music belonged to them alone. That version of Jack was buried the night a drunk driver failed to see the red light. He had not touched a keyboard in 10 years. The memories of the concert hall, the echo of applause, the way his wife's fingers had tapped along his forearm to the rhythm, all of it had grown sharp enough to cut. There are griefs that make you cling to what you loved. His did the opposite. The piano became a burned house he refused to walk past. He found a job no one asked him about. Night janitor in a building full of people who never learned his name. Here he could vanish into the sound of water and the squeak of wheels, into the predictable weight of a mop handle in his hands. Here, no one looked at his fingers and asked, "Don't you play?" On that night, sometime after 11, he dipped the mop back into the bucket and wrung it out until the dirty water dripped away. The hall stretched ahead, a quiet tunnel lined with glass and polished wood. His reflection moved along the floor with him, broad shoulders, tired eyes, a small streak of gray at his temples that had arrived earlier than it should have. He was alone, as usual, or so he thought. Halfway down the corridor, he heard it, a sound too fragile for that corridor of executives and artificial air. Piano notes, uncertain, wandering, like someone groping their way through darkness and bumping into furniture. Jack straightened, the mop pausing mid-arc. The sound was coming from the music room at the far end of the floor, a space Helios had designed for donors and clients and holiday events. 2 grand pianos, a polished stage, soft lighting, walls made to flatter sound. He had cleaned it 100 times without ever letting his hands drift down onto the keys. He had wiped fingerprints from the lid of a Steinway without leaving his own. Tonight, someone else was touching what he refused to. The notes faltered and started again. He heard the shape of a melody he knew by heart, carved into his bones from younger years. Clair de Lune. Only this version sounded like a constellation broken into stray stars. It was almost painful. It was also impossibly tender. The mop handle knocked once against the bucket as he let it fall back into the water. He wiped his palms on his uniform as if preparing for something he did not yet understand, then walked toward the open door at the end of the hall. It was not fully open. It hung crooked in its frame, a wedge of light slipping out into the dark. He pushed it a little with his fingertips, careful not to let the hinges complain. Inside, one of the pianos gleamed beneath a recessed light. The other sat in the shadows, lid closed. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and the ghost of perfume from some gala long finished. At the bench of the lit piano sat a little girl. She could not have been more than 9. Her back was straight. Her feet didn't reach the floor. Her hair fell around her face in tangles, as if no one had bothered to smooth it properly after a long day. Her small hands were spread over the keys, searching. The instant he saw her eyes, Jack understood. They were open, but they were not searching the way her fingers did. They were still, unfocused. When she lifted her head, she didn't glance toward the movement in the doorway. She listened instead, turning her face toward the faint scuff of his shoe against the floor. For a heartbeat, Jack froze. What was a child doing here at this hour, alone on the 20th floor? He knew Helios was the kind of place where executives let their children wait in quiet rooms while meetings ran over, but this was different. There was no adult in sight, no coat draped over a chair, no briefcase nearby. Only the girl and the piano and a melody that couldn't quite find itself. He stepped inside, instinctively softening his footsteps. "Don't stop," he said gently. "You are about to find it." She jerked her hands away from the keys. "Who's there?" "Just the man with the squeaky bucket," he answered. "I clean this floor at night." "You're the janitor," she said, not as an insult but as a fact. "Yes." He gestured toward the second piano more for himself than for her. "May I sit?" The girl tilted her head. Her face was narrow, her features delicate. But it was the expression that caught him, an odd mix of caution and hunger. "Do you play?" she asked. "I used to." The words tasted like a confession. She was quiet for a breath. "Then maybe you can tell me why this song sounds wrong when I play it." Jack moved to the second piano. He sat down slowly, the bench creaking, the white and black keys stretched out before him like a language he used to be fluent in but hadn't spoken aloud in a decade. He laid his hands in his lap first, listening to his pulse pounding in his ears. He could walk away. He could tell her he didn't have time, that he had floors to finish, that the music room was for other people. But she was a small child alone in a building of glass and steel at nearly midnight, trying to summon the moon with her hands. He could not walk away from that. "What's your name?" he asked, buying himself another second. "Lily." "Lily," he repeated. "That suits you." "Why?" "Because it sounds like something that grows in the dark and still reaches for the light." She smiled at that. It changed her whole face. "And you?" "Jack." He placed his fingertips lightly on the keys, almost as if asking permission. The first touch set off an ache that ran up his arms into his chest. The last time he had played, his wife had been alive. The last time he had played, the future still had shapes and colors. He drew a breath deep enough to hurt and began to play. Claire de Lune rose from the piano, not in the hesitant fractures he had heard earlier, but as one long, flowing breath of sound. The notes knew their way, even if his hands trembled at first. Muscle memory and something older than that guided them. Grief softened them, turning each phrase into an apology and a promise. The room changed. Even the air seemed to lean closer. Lily's face turned fully toward him now, as if the music were a light she could see. Her lips parted, her hands, still resting on the other keyboard, relaxed. When he reached the final chord, he let it ring out until it dissolved into silence. "That," she whispered, "sounds like the ocean at night." He swallowed. "How do you know what the ocean at night sounds like?" "I don't," she admitted. "But if it had a sound, that's what it would be." A laugh slipped out of him, surprising them both. "Maybe you've heard it after all." "I only hear what people tell me," she said quietly, "and what the piano tells me." Her right hand drifted across the keys again, but she didn't press them down yet. "When I play, it's like I can almost touch something, but it keeps slipping away." "You're closer than you think." He shifted slightly on the bench. You're finding all the stars. You just haven't connected them into a sky yet. How do I do that? She asked. By listening between the notes. She frowned. There's nothing between the notes. There's everything between them, he said. That's where feeling lives. He thought of the nights he'd played in the military orchestra, the way men with dirt on their boots and letters from home in their pockets had closed their eyes and breathed with the music. What are you feeling when you try to play this piece? She hesitated. Like I'm standing in a place I've never been, but somehow I remember it. Then start from there. He lifted his hands again. Play how that feels, not how you think it's supposed to sound. She put her fingers back on the keys, tentative. The first notes were still uneven, like feet finding their balance at the edge of a river. But something in her touch was different now. She was less focused on striking the right key and more on letting it ring, listening as it faded. She stumbled, stopped, tried again. Jack did not correct her. He only breathed with the music, offering a quiet yes when she brushed against something true. The girl wore a thin silver bracelet on her right wrist, just above the bone. When she lifted her hands, the light caught on a row of tiny engraved letters. Jack squinted, trying to make them out from across the distance. Here with your heart. The words were so small he almost doubted he'd read them correctly. That's a special bracelet, he murmured. Lily's hand drifted to it. Her fingers traced the metal. My dad gave it to me, she said. The present tense fractured into a silence. Before he left. Jack's jaw tightened. He had learned over the years that you do not ask a child what left means. Sometimes it means death, sometimes abandonment, sometimes a long hospital stay no one knows how to name. All of it hurts. It's a beautiful reminder, he said instead. To do what? She asked. To be where your feet are, he said after a moment, even if your eyes can't follow. He didn't realize he had said something he himself needed to hear until the words left his mouth. Will you... She stopped, as if afraid of asking too much. Will you come back and teach me? There were a dozen reasons to refuse. Company policy, his shift schedule, the fact that she almost certainly belonged to someone important, and people like him were supposed to remain invisible. But her voice carried the same tremor he'd heard years ago when his daughter, Ava, had clutched his pant leg outside her first day of school and asked, You'll still be here when I come out, right? He could not bear to say no, not to a child who sat alone in a high, empty tower making conversation with a piano because there was no one else to talk to. If your mother doesn't mind, he said carefully. She doesn't care what I do as long as I'm quiet, Lily replied, a little too quickly. She's always in meetings. That answer did something sharp in his chest. Then yes, he said. I'll come back. Promise? Promise. Out in the hallway, unseen, a woman leaned her shoulder against the wall and pressed a hand over her mouth. The white of her suit glowed faintly under the emergency lights. Her hair was pulled back with the kind of precision that told the world she did not make mistakes. Her name was Clara Voss. At 33, she occupied the top floor of Helios with the kind of absolute authority that made grown men lower their voices when she entered a room. She was the architect of the company's rise, the one who signed documents that shifted markets and determined who would and would not be invited into future boardrooms. She was, by every measure that mattered to people who read business magazines, a stunning success. But at that moment, in that dim hallway at almost midnight, she was not a CEO. She was a mother who had just realized that the sound she was hearing from the music room, the full, luminous version of Claire de Lune, was not coming from a recording, but from the hands of a stranger sitting beside her blind daughter. Clara had come down from her office because the silence between two conference calls had suddenly become unbearable. She had told herself she would only peek in, make sure Lily was fine, press a kiss to her hair, and promise to be done soon. She had said that word so many times it had lost all meaning. When she reached the door and heard the music, she stopped. Her first instinct was irritation. Who had authorized anyone to be in that room this late? The building had procedures. The staff had clear roles. Children were never supposed to be alone with employees. But the irritation was swallowed by something else the moment she caught sight of Lily's face. Her daughter, who so often sat still and careful, wary of the world that was full of things she could bump into, was leaning into the sound like someone leaning into sunlight. Her lips moved along with the melody. Her fingers twitched as if learning even when they were resting. And beside her, in a janitor's uniform, was a man whose posture contained something she recognized without knowing him. The bearing of someone who used to stand on a different kind of stage. Clara stayed in the hallway, unable to step inside, unable to walk away. Her throat tightened. Love and guilt rose together, an old, familiar tide. It was late. Lily should have been home in bed, not waiting on a piano bench for a mother who kept telling herself that the next quarter would be different. The song ended. The janitor spoke to Lily in a tone of respect, not pity. He did not talk to her as a broken thing. He asked her what she felt. He listened to her answers. Clara felt something inside her chest crack, the way glass does when exposed to sudden heat. She could not remember the last time she had really listened to her daughter outside of medical appointments and therapy updates. She stepped back from the door without making a sound. Every muscle pulled tight like a string. She could have gone in. She could have demanded names and explanations and promises that this would never happen again. Instead, she did what people who are already drowning in their own compromises often do. She retreated. She told herself she would address it later when the deal closed, later when the crisis passed, later when her head was clearer, later when life wasn't a hallway full of urgent calls and blinking notifications. Of course, later rarely comes in the form we imagine. The next night, at the usual hour, Lily waited on the piano bench with her fingers resting in her lap. She listened for the sound of wheels squeaking along the hallway. She had learned the exact rhythm of his steps. When they drew near, she smiled before he even reached the door. "Uncle Jack," she called, trying the name on her tongue as if it were a song. He stopped in the doorway. "When did I get promoted to uncle?" "You were always an uncle," she said solemnly. "You just hadn't met me yet." He laughed, unable to argue with the strange logic of children. Their evenings fell into a pattern so gentle he didn't notice it tightening around his heart. Jack would finish his duties as quickly and thoroughly as he could, making sure the restrooms gleamed and the trash bins were emptied and the fingerprints were wiped from the stainless steel surfaces. Then, when the building quieted and the offices went dark, he would ride the elevator up to the 20th floor and walk down the long, echoing corridor to the music room where Lily waited. Sometimes the practice began with scales, her fingers stumbling up and down, missing notes, laughing at her own mistakes. Other times he would sit beside her and guide her hands over the keys, showing her how a chord felt before it sounded. Her sense of touch was extraordinary. She remembered the shape of an interval like other people remembered faces. "This one feels sad," she'd say, dropping a minor third. "That's right," he'd answer. "Now make it hopeful." She'd adjust a single note. The whole chord would tilt toward the possibility of light. Between exercises, they talked. She asked questions about everything and nothing. "What does red sound like?" "Like trumpets," he said, "and sirens, and someone laughing too loudly at a bad joke." "What about blue?" "Cellos, distant thunder. The quiet after a fight when no one knows what to say yet." "And sunset?" "Sunset is one long sigh," he said, "the world letting go." "I wish I could see it," she murmured. You do, he answered softly. Just not the way everyone else does. She hugged him once without warning, her arms suddenly around his middle. He had been pointing out a phrase in a Schubert impromptu when she slid closer on the bench and pressed her cheek into his side. He froze, the gesture cracking through his defenses like a beam of light through a boarded-up window. "Thank you for playing with me," she whispered. "Everyone else is always too busy. You make the day feel different." He swallowed past the dryness in his throat. "I should be thanking you," he said. "You're the one who dragged the piano back into my life." "You left it?" "I thought I had to," he admitted. "Sometimes you think if you stay away from what you love, it won't hurt so much when you lose it." "Did it work?" she asked. "Not really," he said. The more they played, the more his own memories began to shift. The piano in this room was not the one he'd shared with his wife, but under his hands it started to feel less like a tombstone and more like a doorway. When he closed his eyes and listened to Lily's hesitant melodies, he did not see hospital corridors or white sheets. He saw his wife's hand resting on his shoulder in some remembered rehearsal, heard her voice saying, "Play like you're telling me a secret." He heard his daughter Ava as a toddler banging joyfully on the keys. Ava lived in another city now with his sister. Joint custody, complicated by work and distance and the cruel math of bills, meant he saw her on alternate weekends at best. He sent child support without fail. He missed bedtime stories without cure. There were nights he sat in his small apartment, staring at his phone, wondering if he was failing both the living and the dead. Being needed by Lily did not erase that ache, but it gave it shape. It turned his guilt into something that could move and breathe instead of something that only crushed. The building, of course, did not share that sentiment. Rules are structures meant to protect, but they are also convenient shields for people who do not want to look too closely at their own choices. It took time for the quiet ritual in the music room to draw attention. The security guard who walked his rounds on the night shift liked his life simple. Check the doors, sign the logs, go home to his own sleeping family. He had seen the little blind girl a few times, escorted by a nanny or an assistant, and knew she belonged to someone important. When he heard the piano late one Tuesday and glanced at his watch, he frowned, noted it, and decided it was probably some event he had not been informed about. But rules, once written, have a way of insisting on being enforced. One evening, his schedule shifted. He passed the music room earlier than usual. The sound of a piano drifted through the half-open door, 2 pianos this time, intertwining. Curiosity, or perhaps the vague prickle of responsibility, pushed him to look inside. He saw a janitor in uniform seated beside the girl, their shoulders almost touching. No other adult, no manager, no parent, just the 2 of them in a room that, according to policy, should have been locked. His training did not include instructions for what to do with men who played Brahms duets with blind children after hours. It did, however, include clauses about liability and unauthorized use of corporate resources. "Excuse me," he said, stepping in, hand already moving toward the radio clipped to his belt. The music stopped mid-phrase. Lily's hands flew up in a small spasm of alarm. Jack turned, heart sinking as soon as he saw the expression on the guard's face. It was not cruelty. It was fear dressed up as sternness. "What's going on here?" the guard demanded. "I was just helping her practice," Jack said quickly. "We weren't." "He's my teacher," Lily blurted. "Please don't be mad at him." "Ms. Voss knows about this?" the guard asked, ignoring her. "Does management know?" Jack faltered. He had never asked permission. He had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that what he was doing fell outside the edges of his job description. "It's just music," he said. "We haven't heard anything." The guard's jaw tightened. "You know I have to report this." Lily made a small, desperate sound. "He didn't do anything wrong?" "That's not my call," the guard replied. He stepped back, voice low into the radio. Jack sat very still. The bracelet on Lily's wrist caught the light as her hand trembled. "Are you in trouble because of me?" she whispered. "No," he lied gently. "No, little one. This was my choice." The next morning, he was summoned to an office with glass walls and careful furniture, a place built to make people feel small in ways they couldn't quite name. The man behind the desk had a face that looked assembled from angles: sharp cheekbones, sharp nose, sharp gaze. His nameplate read, "Richard Miller, Facilities and Operations Manager." He did not offer a chair. "Do you understand why you're here, Mr. Rowan?" he asked, voice clipped. Jack remained standing. "I imagine it has to do with last night," he said. "That's one way to put it," Richard replied. "Your access card shows repeated use on the 20th floor after your designated cleaning hours. Security confirmed you were in the music room with a minor, alone, no authorization, no supervisor." "I was teaching her piano," Jack said. "She's here in the evenings, alone. I couldn't just—" "You are paid to clean," Richard interrupted. "Not to play music, not to interact with tenants' children." He spoke the word children as if it were a volatile chemical. "There are liability issues, legal issues. Personally, I think it's inappropriate. The optics are terrible. A janitor alone with a little girl at night? Do you understand how that looks?" Shame flared hot and instinctive in Jack's neck, then turned quickly into anger. "How it looks," he said tightly, "is like a child who would have been sitting by herself in a silent room instead had someone to talk to. Don't get noble with me." Richard leaned back in his expensive chair. "I am not questioning your intent. I am telling you the rules." He picked up a printed file, flicked it open without reading. "You are on thin ice as it is. This building runs because people respect boundaries. We cannot have staff forgetting their place." The words landed heavier than they needed to. Jack's hand curled at his side. "My place," he repeated quietly. "Yes," Richard said, misreading his tone as submission. "This is your formal warning. If you are found in that room again for any reason outside of cleaning duties, your employment will be terminated. I won't be able to look the other way next time, even if I wanted to." It was clear he did not. Jack stared out at the corridor visible through the glass. People walked past, carrying tablets and coffee, badges swinging, unaware of what was happening in the small aquarium of that office. He thought of his rent, his overdue utility bill, the new pair of shoes Ava needed, the tuition payments he was still making on the last part of his wife's hospital debt, as if the grave required monthly installments. Finally, he nodded. "I understand." "Good." Richard closed the file with a satisfied little thump. "You can go." As Jack reached for the door, Richard added almost casually, "Men in your position should be grateful they have work at all." The words slipped under Jack's skin like splinters. He walked out without replying. That evening, he scrubbed the floors without listening for music. He stayed on lower levels, taking longer than necessary with every corridor. The building sounded different without the thought of Lily waiting up above, a little too hollow, like a shell after the creature has left. At the end of his shift, he rode the elevator down instead of up, and stepped into the night air with his chest drawn tight. His small apartment seemed even smaller when he unlocked the door. He sat on the couch, staring at his phone, thumb hovering over his daughter's name. He wanted to hear Ava's voice, but it was late, and she had school in the morning, and he did not know how to explain to a 10-year-old why he had just walked away from a piano for the second time in his life. On the 20th floor, in a room with 2 pianos, A blind girl waited with her palms resting on the cool keys and tried to convince herself that the echo of her footsteps in the empty hallway earlier had been a mistake, not a sign that the world was about to repeat a familiar story. "He'll come," she whispered into the quiet. He promised. The next night, she did not wait long before the fear that had been crouched beside her hope since childhood stretched and sat down beside her. People said they would come back. Lovers of her mother, therapists, teachers, temporary nannies. They all said the same things. "I'll always be here for you. I'm not going anywhere. You are special to me." Then one day the wheelchair wheels squeaked down a different hall. The coat never came off the rack again, or the seat in the car remained empty. Lily learned, earlier than any child should, that promises sometimes broke not with a loud crash but with a quiet absence. By the time the cleaning cart wheels squeaked past the end of the corridor, Jack had already decided that he would protect his job, his paycheck, his fragile stability. He had convinced himself that what he had given her in those nights was enough. He would carry the memory. She would find another teacher. When he heard the faint echo of her voice down the corridor, "Uncle Jack?" His resolve cracked. It was not just the sound of his name. It was the way she said it, tangled with rain and pleading. His hand hovered over the elevator button. He could press G and descend, disappearing back into the anonymous river of commuters. No one would stop him. No one would even know. Or he could turn around and walk toward the music room. Lose his job. Risk being escorted out in front of everyone. Risk being told again what his place was. He stood there for a long second, the hallway humming with fluorescent light, his own breath loud in his ears. In the end, the decision was not made by logic. It was made by the memory of another little girl's small hand clamped around his thumb in a hospital waiting room, her voice asking, "They're going to fix Mommy, right?" And his inability then and now to let go of a hand reaching for him in the dark. He turned around. When he pushed open the music room door, Lily gasped. "You came," she said, voice breaking on the last word. He knelt beside the bench instead of going straight to the other piano. "I'm sorry I didn't come yesterday," he said. "Grown-ups tell lies," she said bluntly. "They say they're busy, but it just means they don't want to." "This time it meant I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of getting fired. Afraid I'd lose the one thing keeping me afloat. Afraid of a man who thinks uniforms are the same thing as a person." "Mr. Miller," she said quietly, "he doesn't like anyone who isn't important." "He doesn't understand that people are important before they get titles," Jack said. "But you came anyway," she whispered. "And I will pay for it," he answered, not quite under his breath. "But tonight—" He took her hands, placed them gently back on the keys. "Tonight, we play." They did. It was their best night yet. She moved with a fluency that made him forget how short a time they'd been working together. They played a simple duet, her left hand walking slowly while his right hand spun a melody above it like light on water. She laughed when he deliberately missed a note to see if she would catch it. "Again," she insisted, "but right this time." "You'll be a tyrant in rehearsals someday," he joked. "What's a tyrant?" "Someone who demands the music live up to its own potential." He forgot for that hour that every key he touched was sealed with the risk of consequence. He remembered only that he was, finally, doing the one thing in the world that had ever felt like breathing to him. Outside the door, 3 silhouettes paused. Richard stood with 2 other employees, summoned as witnesses. He had not been surprised to see the access logs show Jack's card on the 20th floor again. Some people, he thought, needed to be reminded the hard way where they belonged. He opened the door with the authority of someone who had already written the ending. "Mr. Rowan," he said sharply. The music broke. Lily flinched, her hand snatching back. Jack rose. He knew the script. He had seen it in other workplaces, other lives. Warning, accusation, dismissal. Security escort. Box with personal items. A silence where your name used to be on a schedule. I told you this would happen, Richard continued. You have been explicitly instructed to stay out of this room. I'm not hurting anyone, Jack said quietly. She is here alone. Someone should— That is not your concern, Richard snapped. You are not family. You are not staff assigned to her care. You are a janitor. Do you need the dictionary definition of that, or is 3 syllables too many? One of the other employees shifted, uncomfortable. The other watched with a small smirk. Shame is a heavy thing to witness. Some people handle the weight by looking away, others by enjoying that it isn't falling on them. Lily stood up abruptly. Her hands groped in the air until she found Jack's sleeve. She held onto it like an anchor. Please, she said, turning toward the general direction of Richard's voice. You can't take him away. He's the only one who sees me. The words landed in the room with an almost physical force. Even Richard blinked. This is not negotiable, he said after a moment, tone harder to compensate for the crack. Security will escort you out, Mr. Rowan. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. There was no dramatic struggle. Jack did not raise his voice, did not beg. He knew from experience that dignity, once tossed into an argument like a chip on a table, was difficult to retrieve. He knelt instead, bringing himself down to Lily's height. Remember what I told you, he whispered. Where to play from? Her lower lip trembled. From here, she said, pressing her hand to her chest. From your heart, he confirmed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper with a phone number written on it in cramped ink. If you ever need me, he said, for any reason, you call that number. It might take me a while, but I will come. He curled her fingers around it. Security waited, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Regulations were being fulfilled. Boxes were being checked. Hearts, of course, were not their jurisdiction. 3 days later, Jack was stacking boxes in the back of a grocery store, the smell of bruised fruit and overworked refrigeration humming around him. The job paid less. The hours were worse. But no one asked him why he'd been fired. No one cared what he'd done before. His coworkers called him Buddy and Man, and never once asked for his last name. At night, he lay on his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, hearing the echo of Lily's aborted phrases ricocheting off the plaster. On the 20th floor of Helios, something shifted. For a few nights, Lily refused to touch the piano. Whoever escorted her to the music room found her sitting with her hands folded stubbornly in her lap, sightless eyes turned toward the wall. When they asked if she wanted music on, she shook her head. It's broken, she said. She didn't mean the instrument. One evening, Clara finished a call earlier than usual. Her voice was raw from negotiations. Numbers swam in front of her eyes when she looked at the reports. She needed something that wasn't a screen. Guilt had been sitting on the edge of her desk for days, swinging its legs, watching her work. She had ignored it with professional efficiency. That night, it refused to be ignored. She took the elevator down, heels clicking an impatient rhythm. On the ride, she told herself she would finally talk to the music teacher she'd been meaning to hire, the specialist who'd sent glowing references, the woman whose email sat unanswered in her inbox. She would make a schedule. She would fix this, like she fixed everything else. The corridor outside the music room was quiet. Then she heard it. Piano again. Not the wandering, halted sounds she remembered from weeks ago, but something far more assured. A familiar melody. River flows in you, flowed from the room, delicate and confident. Clara stepped closer, heart beating faster. She looked in through the narrow window. Lily was at the piano, fingers moving with a poise that made Clara stop in the doorway instead of entering. How long had her daughter been playing like this without her noticing? How many evenings had she told herself she would come down after this email, after this call, and then looked up to find the building empty and the chance gone? "Mommy?" Lily said suddenly, breaking off mid-phrase. "Is that you?" Clara startled. "How did you know I was here?" "I heard your shoes," Lily replied simply. "They always sound like they're in a hurry." The words hit harder than any shareholder complaint. Clara stepped inside, forcing a smile into her voice. "You're getting very good," she said, pride and surprise tangled. "When did you learn to play like that?" "Uncle Jack taught me," Lily said, as if stating the most obvious thing in the world. "He said music is how you see with your heart when your eyes can't help." The name snagged in Clara's mind. Somehow, in the past week, she had pushed the image of the janitor at the piano to the edges of her consciousness. "Uncle Jack," she repeated. "The man in the uniform? The one security escorted out?" Lily nodded, the movement small. "Mr. Miller said he's not allowed here anymore. He said he's just a janitor, not a teacher. But Uncle Jack is the only one who—" Her voice cracked for the first time. "Who doesn't sound sorry for me when he talks." Clara's hand closed reflexively around the phone in her pocket. The word "just" hung in the air, heavy and sour. Just a janitor. Just a worker. Just the man who had coaxed this music out of her daughter while Clara was upstairs negotiating contracts that would never know her child's name. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with the name of an investor she'd been chasing for months, a call that could not, in the world she had built, be ignored. "I have to take this," she said, hating how familiar the sentence felt in her mouth. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be right back." She stepped into the hallway. The call took 20 minutes and 2 decades. When she hung up, the carpet beneath her feet felt like it belonged to someone else's life. She hurried back toward the music room, words of apology forming in her throat. At the door, she stopped. 2 pianos were singing. She did not step inside. She watched. On the left bench, Lily's small frame swayed slightly as she played, listening with her whole body. On the right, unmistakable in his uniform despite the way he sat, was the man she had seen that first night. Jack's hands moved over the keys with the assurance of someone who had spent more hours with an instrument than with other people. Their duet was not flawless, but it was alive. "Feel the spaces," he was saying, his voice audible through the thin door. "Let the melody breathe. Don't rush to the next note just because you're afraid of silence." Lily laughed, a clear, bright sound that tripped down Clara's spine like light. Clara realized, with a horrible jolt, that she had not heard that kind of laughter from her daughter in years. Tears blurred her vision. She lifted a hand to the doorframe, steadying herself. The world was capable of rewriting a person's priorities in a single instant. She had seen it in hostile takeovers and unexpected crises. Now it was doing it to her life, not her company. She pushed the door open. The music wavered, then stopped. Jack rose so quickly the bench scraped backward. "Ms. Voss," he said, recognizing her at once. The suit, the gaze, the slight weariness hidden behind perfectly tailored power. "I know I'm not supposed to be here." Lily called and... "Mom?" Lily turned her head toward her. "Did I do something wrong?" Clara's eyes moved between them. Jack's hands were still hovering above the keys, betraying a man caught between fight and flight. Lily's fingers curled in on themselves, bracing. Clara's voice was very calm when she spoke, which for her meant the opposite of anger. "Who are you?" she asked Jack, as if they had never met. "Really?" "Jack Rowan," he said. "I used to work here as a janitor." "Used to?" "I was fired 3 days ago," he said. For teaching your daughter piano. A muscle in Clara's jaw twitched. As if summoned by his name, Richard appeared in the hallway, having been alerted by security that the terminated employee had returned. He stepped into view, straightening his tie. "Ms. Voss," he began smoothly, "I was just about to inform you—" "Is it true?" she asked without looking at him. "That you dismissed this man for spending time in this room with my daughter?" "We have policies," Richard said carefully. "He violated access protocols. There are boundaries between staff and tenants for a reason. I had to think of the company's liability. And I didn't know she was your daughter." "That makes it worse," Clara said. "Not better." He blinked. "Worse?" "You didn't think what it meant to her," she said, voice still quiet. "You saw a uniform and decided it told you everything you needed to know." She turned to Jack. "Why did you come back if you knew it could get you arrested?" He swallowed. "Because she needed me," he said simply. "And I don't walk away from the people I care about anymore. I've done enough of that in my life." Lily slid off the bench, hands searching until she found her mother's fingers. She pulled them forward until they also found Jack's rough knuckles. Her small hand wrapped both of theirs together. "Mommy," she said, "Uncle Jack taught me how to hear your face." Clara choked on a laugh that was half sob. "Hear my face?" "He says every person sounds different," Lily explained. "Yours is strong and sad and kind even when you're tired. That's what I play when I think of you." Tears broke their last restraint. They ran hot and unchecked down Clara's cheeks. For a moment she did not care who saw. "You did this?" she whispered to Jack. "No," he said. "She did. I just reminded her that she wasn't broken, only tuned differently." Silence settled, thicker than before. A line was being drawn in the room, not between ranks, but between who Clara had been and who she was about to choose to be. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Don't leave," she said to Jack. "Not yet." She turned her head toward the cast of the hallway. "Mr. Miller," she added, "you can go, and you will meet me in my office at 8 sharp tomorrow." "Miss Voss, that's not a suggestion." There was steel in her voice now, the same steel that had built Helios out of nothing. Richard went pale. "Yes, ma'am." He retreated, the line of his shoulders no longer sure. When he was gone, the room felt larger. Clara sank to her knees in front of Lily, taking her daughter's face in both hands. Up close, she could see the faint bruise-colored circles under the girl's eyes, the result of too many late nights waiting in bright rooms while her mother closed deals upstairs. "I am sorry," she said, each word anchored. "I spent so much time building a future that I forgot you were my present." "I thought you were mad at me," Lily whispered, "for needing help." "No," Clara said. "No, sweetheart." She pressed her forehead to her daughter's. "I am angry at myself for making you feel alone in a building with my name on the door." Lily leaned in, small arms flung around her neck. "You're here now," she murmured. Clara held her the way a person clings to a piece of driftwood after a shipwreck. When she looked up at Jack again, her eyes were different, softer, but sharper. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing her, for seeing what I was too busy, or too afraid, to see." He shifted, uncomfortable with praise. "She is easy to see," he said, "if you're looking." The next morning a message went out to every Helios employee. All hands meeting, mandatory, main atrium, 9:30 a.m. No exceptions. People grumbled, speculated, checked their calendars. Emergencies of this size usually meant restructuring, layoffs, acquisitions. Rumors flew like birds trapped in a glass cage. The atrium was a cavern of polished stone and steel, sunlight pouring in from a massive skylight overhead. Balconies from the upper floors ringed it, giving people vantage points from which to observe without being fully seen. At 9:30, Clara stepped onto the small raised platform near the central staircase. She was not carrying a tablet or notes. Her suit was immaculate, but there was something in her face the staff had never seen in a company meeting. Naked emotion. The crowd quieted. "I want to tell you a story," she said. Her voice carried without a microphone. The space had been designed with acoustics in mind, though no one had imagined it would be used for confession. 3 nights ago, a man was fired from this company. She felt the shift in the crowd, the mental tally everyone did, searching their memories for fresh absences in their departments. He worked here for years. His title was Night Janitor. His name is Jack Rowan. Heads turned. Some people recognized the name, or the description. Many did not. Night staff were like the moon, their presence assumed, their details unnoticed. He was dismissed for being in a room he was not authorized to be in after his shift, Clara continued. He was in the music room on the 20th floor with a child. That child is my daughter. The rustle of reaction swelled, then fell. He did not know who she was. He did not know who I was. He received no extra pay, no recognition, no title change. He sat down at a piano after a day of scrubbing the floors you walk on, and he taught a blind little girl how to turn sound into color. He is the reason she laughs when she plays now. He is the reason she believes that her blindness is not a punishment, but another way of seeing. Clara paused. Her throat burned. "This company likes to talk about values," she said. "We print them on walls and websites. We tell investors we care about people. But somewhere along the way, we started measuring worth with the wrong tools. We began acting as if the only voices that mattered were the ones in corner offices." She lifted her chin. "Today, that changes." She turned toward the side entrance. "Jack, would you join me?" He stepped forward from where he had been standing near the edge of the crowd, feeling entirely out of place in the suit someone from HR had pressed into his hands that morning. It fit him strangely around the shoulders. He felt like a child in borrowed clothes, though he carried himself with the quiet steadiness of a man who had long since learned that what you wear doesn't alter who you are. Conversation stilled as he climbed the short steps to the platform. People who had walked past him 100 times without seeing him now stared, their eyes full of curiosity and the faint discomfort of recognizing their own blindness. "This is the man," Clara said, placing a hand lightly on his arm, "who saw my daughter when I was too busy seeing spreadsheets. He gave her what all my resources and power could not, the feeling of being understood." She turned back to the crowd. Effective immediately, Jack Rowan is being reinstated not as a janitor, but as the Director of Music Programs for the Helios Foundation. "We are launching a new initiative to provide free music education to children with disabilities in this city. He will lead it." The applause started with a few scattered claps, then grew as people understood what they were witnessing. Not just a promotion, but a public declaration that the hierarchy they had all quietly accepted had been rearranged in front of their eyes. Jack stood rigid, stunned. "I don't know what to say," he murmured to Clara under the roar of the crowd. "I'm just—" "Don't ever use the word just on yourself again," she said. "You are not just anything. You are exactly what we need." On the edge of the crowd, Richard shifted uncomfortably. Clara's gaze found him with surgical precision. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice calm again but edged with something cold. "Would you come forward, please?" A different kind of silence fell, the kind reserved for accidents and verdicts. Richard hesitated, then pushed his way through bodies and stepped up beside the platform, not quite on it. He looked smaller in front of so many witnesses. "You fired Mr. Rowan," Clara said. "You did not inform me. You did not investigate beyond an access log. You saw a man in a janitor's uniform with a child, and assumed inappropriate behavior instead of asking why that child would cling to him as if he were the only solid thing in her world." "I was protecting the company," he said stiffly. "From what?" she asked. "Kindness?" Color rose in his cheeks. "We have policies for a reason." "Policies are meant to protect people," she said, "not to shield us from our own prejudice." She let the words hang. People shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at their shoes. Some watched with undisguised relief that someone was finally speaking a truth they had felt but never said aloud. "I am not terminating you," Clara added. "Helios does not need one more story of an executive scapegoating a subordinate while pretending the culture that shaped him is blameless. But you will no longer be making decisions about people from a glass office." She nodded toward the facilities team standing in their blue and gray uniforms near the back. "You will be reassigned to work alongside the staff you once dismissed. You will spend however long it takes learning what it feels like to be judged by your title before anyone knows your name." His mouth opened, then shut. There was no dignified way to argue without confirming everything she had just said. Finally, he nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. As he stepped down and walked away, the crowd parted in a different way than it had for Jack. Some eyes were accusing. Some were faintly sympathetic. Most were simply reflective, awareness dawning in them that they, too, had looked through people instead of at them. Clara turned back to Jack. "Do you accept?" she asked, and the open microphone carried the question to the rafters. He looked at her, then at the faces watching. They were not the faces he had played for in uniform years ago, but there was a similar hunger in them for something true. He thought of his wife, who had always told him that music wasn't what he did. It was who he was. He thought of his daughter, who would be coming to visit next weekend, who would hear this story in some shape and learn something about her father's spine. He thought of Lily, whose hands traced sound instead of sight, who was waiting somewhere upstairs, bracelet cool against her skin. "Yes," he said. "I accept." 1 year later, the Helios Foundation Music Hall was full, not of executives, not of clients, but of families. Wheelchairs pressed against aisle seats, white canes rested against chair legs. Children with hearing aids, with service dogs, with crutches, with anxious hands clasped tightly in their parents' palms, all crowded into rows under high, warm lights. The stage was lined with music stands and chairs, each occupied by a child with an instrument that looked almost as large as they were. In the center stood 2 grand pianos. Jack adjusted the cuff of his formal jacket, the bracelet on his wrist catching the light. He wore it every day now. Lily had insisted. After the first press interview months back, she had taken the silver circle from her own arm and closed it around his. "You keep it," she'd said, "so you never forget where to play from." Now, under the muted murmur of the audience, he glanced to his right. Lily sat at one of the pianos, poised, her feet barely reaching the pedals, even with the small block beneath them. She wore a simple dark dress and a new bracelet gleaming on her wrist. The engraving on this one read, "Music is light." Her hands rested lightly on her lap, saving their strength. She looked utterly at home. Clara sat in the front row, not in a reserved corporate box, but among the parents and siblings. Her phone was in her hand, not to check email, but to record. Every line of her face was focused on the stage. When Jack lifted his baton, the hall settled into a hush. "This piece," he said, addressing the audience gently, is called The Things We Cannot See. It was written for these children, by all of us. It is about what lives behind your eyes when the world forgets to look. He lowered his hand. The first notes rose from the strings, soft, tentative, like someone opening a door just a little. Then the flutes entered, a thin silver line of sound. As the music grew, so did the sense that something invisible was being given shape in the room. Lily's entrance came like a voice joining a chorus. Her fingers touched the keys with a confidence perfumed by vulnerability. She did not glance at the audience. She had no need. She played as if speaking directly to someone standing just beyond the edge of the stage, someone only she could hear. The melody she carried was simple at first, a child's question. The orchestra answered, surrounding her with harmonies that sounded suspiciously like reassurance. When the music swelled into its central theme, the hall seemed to inhale. Instruments built a ladder of sound and then stepped off, floating for a moment in a chord that balanced perfectly between sorrow and joy. Parents held hands. Strangers felt tears in their eyes without being sure when they had started. In the front row, Clara's shoulders shook. She did not hide it. She had spent too many years hiding weakness in order to survive rooms of men who equated emotional control with competence. Tonight, in this hall that bore her company's name in small letters and her daughter's spirit in large ones, she let herself be fully seen. When the last note faded, there was a heartbeat of stillness, as if no one wanted to be the first to break what had been created. Then the applause came, fierce, sustained. People rose to their feet. Some whistled. Others simply clapped until their palms stung and their hearts steadied. Jack bowed with the children, then moved to Lily's side. He took her hand. Together they bent forward. She did not see the standing ovation, but she heard it. The sound wrapped around her like the warmest light. Backstage afterward, amid the chaos of congratulations and camera flashes, a reporter found them in a corner where the noise was slightly quieter. "Mr. Rowan," she said, shoving her microphone toward him with practiced efficiency, "can you tell us what inspired you to create this program?" He looked at Lily first, then at Clara, who had joined them, one arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I used to believe my life ended when my wife died," he said slowly. "I thought everything meaningful had already happened. I stopped playing. I took whatever job would let me disappear." He glanced at the bracelet on his wrist. "Then one night I heard a little girl trying to make sense of the world through a piano in an empty building." His voice softened. "She reminded me that music isn't about the stage or the applause. It's about what happens in small rooms when no one thinks it matters. When you choose to show up for someone simply because they need you." "And what would you say," the reporter asked, "to people who feel like they've been pushed into the shadows, like the world only sees their uniform, not who they are?" Jack thought of night janitors, grocery shelf stockers, delivery drivers, nurses on double shifts, parents falling asleep on buses with worry in their pockets. He thought of children who moved through hallways by touch, hearing footsteps, but not always hearing their own names, spoken with tenderness. "I'd say this," he answered. "Sometimes the most important moments of your life happen when there's no spotlight, no audience, just you, and a choice to be kind when you could walk away." He touched the bracelet. "If you can learn to live from here," he tapped his chest lightly, "and not from what's written on your badge or your bank account, the rest has a way of following." The reporter lowered her microphone slowly, as if something in his words had reached past the story she thought she was covering. Outside, the city's lights flickered on, one by one, indifferent and beautiful. Inside the hall, children laughed. Instruments clattered as they were put away. Parents wiped mascara and noses and found each other's hands. Clara watched her daughter move through the tangle of legs and cases, navigating with the ease of someone who had learned to read air currents and echoes instead of exit signs. She caught Jack's eye over the crowd. There was a sort of quiet covenant there now, stronger than contracts. Not just between a CEO and an employee, but between three people who had, by colliding, altered the gravitational pull of each other's lives. Later that night, when the hall was empty and the lights dimmed, Jack returned to the stage alone. He slid onto the bench of the second piano. The silence around him was no longer frightening. It felt expectant. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. Not for an audience, not for a paycheck, but for the woman who had sat in front rows years ago, the little girl who slept in another city, and the child who had taught him to see again in a room at the top of a glass tower. In some tall building across town, someone was mopping floors, believing no one would ever know their name. In another, a secretary stayed late, changing a trash bag and humming a tune under her breath. In the Helios Tower, on the 20th floor, a blind girl sat on a piano bench in the dark, her fingers drifting across silent keys, tracing the outline of melodies she already knew. The world would go on looking past people like them, most days. But in the spaces between the notes, in the tiny, ordinary acts of courage and kindness unnoticed by stock reports and news feeds, a different kind of music was being written. It was the sound of a janitor lifting his hands to play again, the sound of a CEO learning to kneel, the sound of a child who could not see teaching two adults to finally look. And if you listened closely enough, late at night, when the city seemed to be holding its breath, you could almost hear the question that had started it all, whispered into the quiet like a prayer. "May I play with you?"